Good morning, Commissioners, and welcome to the January 25th workshop of the Orlando City Council. Thought we'd focus on transportation today. There is a ton of things going on, everything from the I-4 Ultimate to the start of the Southern Terminal at OIA to All Aboard Florida to the Wekiva Parkway, and my favorite, of course, SunRail. And there are a lot of discussions going on among our different transportation agencies. The Expressway Authority has new powers that allows it to play in the area of transit, and they're trying to get their arms around what that means and how they might participate in that way. And then there's been some discussions related to what happens in 5 years when SunRail is turned over from DOT to the locals, and those conversations have started in about 5 different silos, from links to links to Metroplan to the Expressway Authority. And I am still the chairman of SunRail, so I think we have concluded that the most appropriate place to have those conversations is with the SunRail Commission, but I wanted to make sure that all of the funding partners and other transportation agencies were steeped in the history of the contracts and how SunRail came about, because of the roughly 29 members of those different boards, only about 8 of us were around when SunRail was originally, or the agreements were originally entered into, and the largest percentage of those are people that are on our board because we don't have term limits. So I think there's a couple in Seminole, maybe a couple in Orange County, and then 4 of us at the City of Orlando. So District 5 Secretary Noreen Downs is here, along with Program Manager Tanya Lohr, and they are going to give us the history and an update on just where we are, I guess about 18 months into the operation of SunRail. Ladies, take it away.
Going. We've got a nice long presentation. We're going to go over where we've been. You guys know rail's been around, a need and a want for a long time, and where we're at right now, and then where are we going in the future. So we're going to talk about the history. We're going to talk about all of the agreements that we have in place. We have many, many different agreements. We're going to talk about all the different contracts that the DOT is running for SunRail. It's not one contract. There's
Lorraine,
multiple.
any chance you have hard copies of that?
Multiple contracts. We could send it by electronically, right? Do we have hard copies today?
Well, why don't we just send them up somewhere and have a set made, Tanya? Why don't you just send them up to Kathy upstairs and have a set made? Okay, go ahead, Moran, in the meantime.
What?
Go ahead.
Okay. I'll talk slow so you can have your copies. And there's plenty of time for questions in between, too. And then just a project update where we're at. So project history, 1992. We all remember 1992, right? It was a year before I came to the department, a couple generations ago. And that's when Central Florida Commuter Rail Authority project feasibility study was going on. Some of you might have been involved in that. And that probably landed as a feasibility study and didn't go anywhere. But between 2002 and 2004 is when we had a Central Florida North-South Commuter Rail Analysis Alternative Study. And at that time, that was, Lynx was working on that, and Secretary Snyder was Secretary of DOT at the time, and he had asked if DOT could take over some of the different projects and figure out which project rises to the top, and could DOT work at that. And that's when DOT got involved with Secretary Snyder, asking us to do that. So then in 2004, a project came about where by then Tawny was involved, and we were looking at what's the best alternative for the locals. And we were working with CSX and looking at the CSX master plan nationwide. And what were they going to do with their rail line, and what was their master plan on the S line versus the A line. And so it just so happened that the two master plans aligned, that CSX was willing to talk to the department about DOT either leasing or buying the 61 miles of tracks, in which we would have, 17 stations on there, and they would be willing to, because of their master plan, using the S-line, come up with a deal. And in 2004, the negotiations began, and they were long, and but again, it met both needs of the department, the local governments, and CSX. In 2005, there was a regional long-range transportation plan for Central Florida Commuter Rail as a #1 transportation funding priority. So in August 2006, an agreement in principle happened with CSX that we would agree to partner together. And in July and August 2007 is when we went out to yourselves as well as the other funding partners, Orange, Osceola, Seminole, Volusia, and of course yourselves. And we came in.
Can I interject something there,
Yeah.
Naran, as well? So can you back up one slide? So back sometime in the late 90s, Congressman Micah and Corrine had helped us be in a position to receive 85% funding for light rail, which would have run from roughly Maitland down to International Drive along I-4. And this Orlando City Council unanimously voted to be a funding partner recipient in that, and you'll recall that Orange County turned the money down with a 3-4 vote, killing light rail service back then.
True.
And also about that time, Doc Dockery had funded an initiative to put high-speed rail into the Florida Constitution, which he successfully did. And then Governor Bush led an effort to repeal that, and I don't remember what year that was, but his premise was that we couldn't have high-speed rail until we developed local rail systems that would feed high-speed rail. And the reason I bring that up is the 2006-07 purchase of the CSX Railway was instigated by Governor Bush. That's how long ago that was, and in keeping with his sentiment that we needed to develop the local systems before we had high-speed rail. So give Governor Bush a little credit for being the one that led the way on this, and his then DOT secretary, which I believe was
Denver Stutler,
Right.
absolutely, yes. They were the key to the whole agreement, absolutely. Without them, that would not have happened. Okay, so we did get, thank you to you, unanimous votes not only in your partnership, but all 5 funding partners, which was unprecedented. So I think people have seen by then the need for rail and what we look like by 2050. And as much as we are, like we are right now, widening I-4 Wekiva Parkway, which is great too, we needed a mass transportation. So thanks to your leadership and our other partners, you agreed to work on a premise of, the premise was 50% federal funding, if we can get that, based on their funding formulas, and 25% local and 25% state. And so then it had to go through legislation to get the no-fault liability insurance worked out, and that took a few times. And by July 2010, at the time it was Secretary Kopeloussis, she made a commitment to pay for the local rail corridor, which were in our agreements, where DOT at the time there was going to be a fixed bonds, and DOT was going to pay off the first 7 years, and the locals were going to pay off the rest for the actual $431 million, which was the corridor for the 61 miles, which is separate from the capital cost of the SunRail project of the 61 miles, which is $615 million roughly. Those were our 2007 numbers. Good morning, Commissioner.
Good morning.
So while you're pausing, that's extremely significant to all of the local governments and goes, I think, forgotten sometimes. So in whatever year that is, 7 years out, we take over the operation of SunRail, but we were also supposed to take over the debt service that was incurred by DOT on the purchase of the corridor, and Secretary Kopeloussis instead paid the entirety off and relieved us of our capital responsibility. So
Yes.
we're ahead of the game any way you possibly look at this as we go into operation.
Right, absolutely. And in December 2010, and I remember working with Tawny that Christmas season.
Yeah, it was fun.
We worked out a deal with Amtrak for a contractual service agreement for maintenance. And so you all remember that wonderful day, July 18th, 2011. It was the hottest day of the year, right? Those of you who were there. But it was so exciting. And it was at the Florida Hospital. We had the ceremonies for the $357.4 million, which is Phase 1 for the first 31 miles of track. So that was $357 million was for the fair share of the track, the stations, the trains, building the communication center. That's where Tawny and the staff is located, our chief operating officer, our dispatch center, and all of that. And so that was a wonderful signing. And on November 3rd, DOT purchased the actual rail corridor from CSX. And I tell you, that was the day when every time we would go over the railroad tracks, you look at those railroad tracks differently, and you sleep with your phone every night because you're now the owner of those railroad tracks. And so the agreements do show that when Amtrak goes in our corridor of the 61 miles and CSX goes in our corridor, they pay us. So that's our income, which will be your income after 7 years. And so, but DOT was responsible for dispatching their trains while our trains were being built back in 2011. So we had our groundbreaking January 27th, 2012, and we had CSX do the dispatching for a while until our folks were trained, and then we took over dispatch July 29th, 2013.
And I think that's a little significant too, Mayor, because if you remember during the negotiations, the locals wanted to not only be the owners of the corridor, but they wanted to be in control of the corridor. And that was a very, very big deal to the locals. They didn't want CSX. Now, remember down in South Florida, that corridor was purchased back in 1989, but CSX retained the maintenance activities as well as the dispatch activities of that. And whoever controls dispatch controls the corridor. So we wanted to make sure we were controlling the trains and the train movement. So that was a very significant time that we took over dispatch prior to us. So we do, all our maintenance forces, as Noran had indicated, moved in November of 2011, and then as we were building our operations and control center, CSX was dispatching, but we took that over in July of 2013, and we control all the trains on the corridor, and that was very important to the locals that we maintain that control right here.
And we also rerouted a substantial amount of the freight traffic from
Right.
R line, the A line, to the S line.
Yeah, that was part of their master plan all along. Yeah, and it was about eight or nine trains? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So May 1st, 2014, that was the date where all of our different SunRail contracts came together for the one day, May 1st, 2014. And the good news was, even though our prices were set back in 2007, the only good news with the recession was prices hadn't gone up for a while, so we kept our prices. So we were actually on time and on budget, which was wonderful. And we started running the train September 28th, 2015. A full funding grant agreement was signed for Phase 2 South, and I know our partners to the south are very excited for that. That will have 17 miles, 4 additional stations. That full funding grant agreement total price is $187 million, and we hope to open by late 17. Early 18. Right now, we are finishing negotiations with our contractors, and we hope to actually do a groundbreaking very soon with that. So we're pretty excited about that. Phase 2 North and DeLand, the design is in progress right now. We could turn it to a design build. As you know, the federal government now has a FAST Act, and at the time when we was working with the federal government for the whole 61 miles, they had asked us to break it up into pieces. They didn't want to do 61 miles at once. And so we went back to the local governments and they broke it up into pieces. So Phase 2 North was a little bit behind Phase 2 South. Right after DeLand made that decision, or Volusia County, not DeLand, they wanted to actually try to get it back into Phase 2 South. So the federal government did work with us. Every time we talked about Phase 2 South, they did have their staff look at Phase 2 North as well, but they were one step behind. So they would not let us combine Phase 2 North and Phase 2 South. The problem with Phase 2 North is it's just tracks and the smaller, more suburban station. And right now, under the federal government, there was no buckets of money to apply for. And so I've got to call into Yvette Taylor, who runs the southeast area, to see under FAST Act which buckets of money, or is there going to be a new Tiger grant or anything like that, because, you know, the state is looking as a whole of trying to get, for the whole state of Florida, a 50-25-25 type match. So we are, again, working on that, and we'll see what happens as far as Phase 2 North. But the good news is we're if money is identified, we could go with a design build for that and just get it ready. So we're just waiting on that 50%, which is about $35 million that we're looking at. Okay.
So as we move forward with the operations of SunRail, there's a number of agreements that we have in place, as Secretary Downs indicated. We have a lot of agreements with the railroad, who are our customers on the tracks, including CSX, including Florida Central, including Amtrak, as well as all the agreements that we work through with all of our local funding partners. So we're going to just spend a couple minutes just briefly going over those agreements and what we live with every day when operating the corridor and operating the service. The biggest agreements we have actually right now is with CSX. So when we bought the corridor from CSX, they retained exclusive freight easement over the corridor. So we operate Commuter Rail, but they still operate the freight over the corridor. So there's a number of agreements that we work through with them, and we have to coordinate very extensively with CSX in terms of our construction, in terms of their trains on our corridor, as well as they provide a fixed funding source, as well as a per car charge for the number of trains that go over the corridor. So we have a set group of people that monitor that per car charge and send the bills every month, as well as when people want to come into our corridor, and there's a lot of construction, we coordinate with CSX. So those agreements that are in place today are the Central Florida Operating and Management Agreement. And the transition agreement has actually sunsetted. That was during our construction of Phase 1. And once we started operating, then that transitioned over to what we call CFOMA, which is the Central Florida Operating and Management Agreement. And then, of course, we have the contract for sale and purchase. Now, with that contract for sale, we actually bought the 61-mile corridor, but we also have two options in there for two spurs that come off the CSX. And the first spur is up in DeLand, and the second one is in Seminole County called the Aloma Spur. And what we did was we have a set amount of time within the agreement to say we want to take over that spur if the locals want to expand service. The Aloma Spur actually goes over to the Orlando Sanford Airport, and DeLand Spur goes up into almost downtown DeLand. So those are all the agreements and things in place of that those two options are within that contract. We also have two more railroad agreements, as I mentioned. We have a small short line railroad, and you probably are aware of this. It's called Florida Central. This is the spur that actually goes up into Lake County, and it comes off at Robinson Street. So you'll see they actually have trains that go down to the Stanton power plant and bring fly ash back up onto their railroad. So we have an operating agreement with them, and then we also have an operating agreement with Amtrak. Amtrak actually operates 6 trains on our corridor, 3 southbound, 3 northbound. 2 of them stop at Sanford. It's the auto train that goes from Lorton, Virginia to Sanford, brings cars and folks down every day. And then the other 4 trains are the through trains from New York. So we have we get money from Amtrak to operate on our corridor as well, and we have some restrictions with Amtrak on the amount of time it takes for them to go over the corridor. If you have questions, please stop us. There'll be a quiz at the end. No. I think the most sort of probably what you are very, very interested in is all of the interlocal agreements that we have. And as Mayor Dyer said, back in 2007, the department and the 5 local funding partners, which included Volusia County, Seminole County, Orange County, City of Orlando, and Osceola County, entered into 3 separate agreements. And those were the Interlocal Governance Agreement, the Interlocal Funding Agreement, and then the Interlocal Operating Agreement. And we'll go into a little bit of more detail of what that means. The Interlocal Governance Agreement was actually signed between the 5 funding partners. Okay, so DOT was not a party to that agreement. And that was the agreement that set forth the governance of the system. During the time that DOT was the steward of the project, 7 years from May 1st, 2014, so that'll be May 1st, 2021, and until when the locals take over at that time and beyond. So that agreement actually established the Central Florida Commuter Rail Commission, which Mayor Dyer indicated he's the chair of, and there was a representative from each of the 5 funding partners. So there is a 5-member board, and it meets at least on a quarterly basis. DOT is not a member of the board. DOT it advises the board now and in the future. That agreement also established a technical advisory committee that meets every month, as well as a customer advisory committee that meets on a quarterly basis. And so that agreement established how the operating deficit was going to be handled after the 7 years, after DOT's. The interlocal funding agreement was actually an agreement that was signed between the 5 local funding partners and the Department of Transportation. And that interlocal funding agreement established how the capital costs for the project would be paid out, and by the percentages by the different local funding partners. So it didn't get into the operating cost, it was more of a capital cost in nature. And then the interlocal operating agreement was actually signed between the Central Florida Commuter Rail Commission and the DOT. And that established all the operating parameters, the base service, and so forth during the time period that the project is under DOT's stewardship, and then afterwards, when DOT's funding period was over. So it talked about fare structure, base service requirements, reporting requirements, and so forth. So that agreement was signed in 2007 as well. And then that agreement also said that we needed to have joint use agreements, because within the agreements it said that DOT was responsible for the design, the construction, and the operations, but the locals were responsible for housekeeping at the stations as well as maintenance at those stations that have parking lots. So we entered into separate joint use agreements subsequent to the interlocal agreements that had those details of how you were going to perform the housekeeping on
Security.
And the security as well. Yes. So what does it all mean? So for the ownership and management, what these agreements in just summary mean is that DOT is responsible for the development, the design, the engineering, the construction, the installation, the procurement, soup to nuts for the first 7 years. Okay, so it's DOT's project until May 1st, 2021. But we have these boards and we have this governance that has been set up of the commission to advise DOT to stay involved with the project. So as the project transitions to the commission has been involved with the project the entire time.
Tani, and
Yes.
you should probably point out, or I will, that the Technical Advisory Committee is made up of technical staff from each of the funding partners, whereas the Customer Advisory Committee is actually writers that are
Right.
appointed by the various jurisdictions, so they're generally going to be regular citizens.
That's right. That's exactly right. And the Technical Advisory Committee also consists of not just the 5 funding partners, but every jurisdiction that has a station, Lynx, Votran, which is in Volusia County, that's the bus service, as well as Metroplan Orlando and the Volusia County Transportation, River to Sea. So it's a board that's made up of all of that, and we meet with them monthly just to share what's happening with the system, the good, the bad, and talk about what's coming up in the future. And that board and the members of that board's duty is to advise the commissions of their jurisdictions so that everybody stays involved. So then after 7 years, which is May 1st, 2021, the Central Florida Commuter Rail Commission assumes all responsibility for the system. So what we've done is made sure that there's a system that can sort of just be transitioned over to the commission. So all of our procurements, and Noran will go over those a little later, has the ability to be signed over to the commission for an additional about a 3-year period, if the commission so chooses. If they don't, they can go out and procure their own contractors. But the whole system was set up, all our oversights, our consultants, we have contractors running the operations so that everything can sort of just be transitioned over in a easy fashion. And within the agreements, the local jurisdictions are required to do a transition plan. So what will happen by May 1st of 2021 is that the DOT will retain ownership of that corridor. So the agreements with CSX and the railroads stay in DOT's name, but the DOT gives an easement to the Central Florida Commuter Rail Commission to operate the service and take care of the corridor. And the draft of that easement is within the documents. The station property, which City of Orlando doesn't necessarily have because you are destination stations, so we didn't buy additional property for parking, but those stations that have parking lots, that land will be signed over to the commission. So the parking lot land, like up in Altamont Springs and Maitland, will become the ownership of the Central Florida Commuter Rail Commission at that time, on May 1st, 2021. At the stations, as I indicated, we do have joint use agreements in place that detail the housekeeping and the maintenance and the security. Those JUAs, while they're in between, like City of Orlando and the DOT, or Seminole County and the DOT, will be assigned over to the commission, the Central Florida Commuter Rail Commission, prior, at the 7-year mark as well. Now, right now, within the agreements, that the local governments at the stations actually have development rights. You have rights at the stations. You have rights to what the agreements say is you have rights to develop that for transit-oriented development. Now, for City of Orlando, because you don't have station property, you do have some rights to do some vendors on the platforms if there's enough room and to work with the DOT on that. So, but at the stations, there are development rights for those local funding partners to do a transit-oriented development on that parking area, as long as they could go up with the parking and provide the parking for the station within that area. So there's a lot of development rights and revenue producing activities for that. We don't charge for parking right now, and we're trying to get the ridership as we're growing the system, but after 7 years, that will be up to the commission to decide if they want to charge for parking. But during DOT's term, we do not charge for parking. For the operations and maintenance, DOT has the ability to run the base service, and that base service is defined in the contract, but anything above and beyond the base service has to be agreed to by our local government partners. So DOT just can't go out there, we're running 36 trains today, and go run a 50-train system, because after 7 years, you would have to pay for that 50-train system. So anything above that base service has to be agreed to by the local government partners.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Tawny, but I think all of the agreements require unanimous agreement between all 5 of the local government funding partners. It can't be a 3-2 or a 4-1 vote.
Yeah, I think there's some, yes, some stipulations in there for that, and supermajority and things like that, yes.
Yeah.
Yep. So after the FDOT funding period is over, May 1st, 2021, the locals actually agreed to a funding formula. So that's been agreed to already, and it's within your governance agreement. And what that agreement was is that the operating deficit would be split among the 5 local funding partners by average boardings. So what is at each station? What does that mean? That means every day we have a tally of what your peak boardings are at each station, and then what your total boardings are at the station, and that is averaged together. And that's how, in the future, in year 8 and beyond, the locals agreed the funding deficit would be split. Okay, so we have started to keep a tally on that with percentage, and then it was also agreed that the fare box revenue that is generated in that station would be credited to that local funding partner. And that's how the funding formula was agreed to in the Interlocal Governance Agreement.
Back to me. Okay, so we're going to go over partner investment. As again, the right-of-way cost was the $432 million. So when you'd read about it in the paper, $1 billion, the 615 is the capital cost for all of the trains, the tracks, the stations, and then the, so you could see how there, it's a 50, 25, 25 split, where federal was $307 million and state and local were $153 million each. And that's for the whole 61 miles, assuming we would get federal funding for the whole 61 miles. As far as the state pays for operation and maintenance the first 7 years, right now we're at about 34.4 million deficit. So that's what we put into the system this past year, in which we sent out to each of you, I forget when we did, how we broke down all of the costs. And so that's what the deficit is, and then in local governments in year 8 would pick up the operations and maintenance.
That's the total cost. We have about a 20% fare box recovery right now on that. So that's about, we've got about 6 million. So the deficit would be that subtraction.
Right, like the 28 million. I think it was 28 million that DOT paid, 27,
Yes.
28 million.
Right.
And average is about 25%, 20 to 25% for fare box recovery, typically. And of course, we're working on that, and I'll go over one of our contracts for that. So these are the different contracts. It's not like we have one road project and one contract. It takes several different expertises to actually do this job, and so we have it broken out into that expertise. So our operations and maintenance, we have a 10-year contract with Bombardier. They're our contractor that They actually do all of the operation and maintenance. For the 61 miles, they hire the engineers, they hire the conductors, they hire the dispatching groups, they hire the maintainers, make sure the track's all good. The next page just shows all the different types of services that contains. They do all the inspections for all of the railroad tracks, drainage, fencing, building, safety for fencing, cleaning, and again, they train all of their folks as they need to do to make sure that they have available staff that can take over should, just like any company, people calling sick, they still got to get the work done. And so this is some of the services. The next page just shows what they do. They do provide dispatching 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We have bridge tender services. Customer service, they have a customer service call-in, you've probably heard of that. IT, very, very important. You know, we've got all new integration, so IT is making sure every system is talking to the other system so that it's all up and running between the dispatching center, the stations, the trains. The next contract is our signal maintenance of way, and that's a company called Herzog. They've done this for a long time, and they do our maintenance for our signals. That contract is 7 years, and it is transferable to the Central Florida Commuter Rail Commission. And so that's what they do. They maintain our signals, keep our signals up and running. And it's not an easy task. You've probably seen them out there. It's probably stopped some traffic occasionally, but it's what they do. Marketing and business development. That's a company that we hired called Data Transfer Solutions. It's a 12-year contract, again, transferred to the Commuter Rail Commission. They do our marketing and business development. Right now, they're outreaching, trying to get more riders, talking to the hospitals, they work with our Bombardier staff to try to tweak the schedules to get more riders. And they manage our ambassador program. For those of you not familiar with our ambassador program, that DOT has paid staff to help new users get on and off the system, to know how to tap on and tap off. That's the system that won the contract for us, and so they're helping them know how to work the machines and get the information out. And they also help us if a machine breaks down. They help us immediately call our techs out there to fix the machines for the folks. Okay, and when I said Tawny and I were working over Christmas that one time, that was us dealing with and working with Amtrak, who is doing a great job with us for vehicle heavy maintenance. I mean, we don't need to build more when you have someone right next door in Sanford that can fix our trains. So again, it's a 7-year contract transferable to the Commuter Rail Commission, and they do all of our locomotives and cab cars for heavy maintenance. Program management and oversight, we have a contractor, CH2M Hill, and they're our SunRail general engineering consultant. 10-year contract. They hire folks that are making sure they're overseeing the day-to-day from Bombardier and Signal contract. They're the ones that work along with our staff. Talk about our staff. What do we have for staff? We have 4 full-time people. We have a chief operating officer, full-time DOT person, a finance person, head finance person. We've got a guy that runs all the contracts, making sure the contracts are being adhered to. And we have another guy that is for safety and making sure things are safe. We put up fencing where it needs to be, helps with leasing and stuff like that. Just 4. That's all we have. Tawny, even though we think we call her our DOT person because she's worked with us 12 years on this, but she's under one of our GEC contracts. And so this is a separate GEC contract, but we have another GEC contract that we use for odds and ends as well, whatever we need it for. And that's one of the things that we have Tawny on, that particular contract. So they help us with compliance. They're out there right away to see if a train's broken down, why it was broken down. Do we need to find the contractor? Whose fault is it? If there's a safety issue, go out there, write the report. Our guys check that. So it's a lot of work. And so that's what the CH2M Hill contract does. So now we're going to go over project update to where we're at now.
One of the things we didn't put in the slides, but we wanted to make sure we mentioned, is that DOT does not run the feeder bus service. So we have contracts with both Votran, which is Volusia County's bus, as well as Lynx for the 3 counties, and DOT does pay for some of the bus service for the feeder system. So DOT does not operate the buses, but we do pay for the feeder service to operate and for that last mile connectivity. So we'll give you a quick project update. Any questions on the history or the agreements, or Mayor, did you want to wait to the end? Or?
If anybody has questions right now, we can wait till the end, I guess.
Okay.
The one thing I wanted to say when we started was the anticipated economic benefit was $1 billion for the 61 miles, and it's up to $3 billion. So that's a nice bonus.
So we celebrated our Phase 1. We're still a construction project because we have Phase 1 in operation now. We're getting ready to start construction in a month or so on the Phase 2 South, and then we have Phase 2 North. We did open up Phase 1 on May 1st, and we were under budget and on time for that. So to familiarize yourself, we do have in Phase 1 the 12 stations through downtown Orlando. We do have, as we mentioned before, free parking. The platforms were actually all designed in coordination and consultation with the local funding partners. So the look of the canopies, the benches and things like that on the station platforms were all done through your staff to give them that look and that flair of what you all wanted to see. We do have security cameras, and we use that a lot. We've got security cameras on the platforms that we monitor in real time at the Operations and Control Center, and we also have cameras on our passenger cars as well as watching our engineers. We do have variable message signs at the stations. We've got bike racks at each of the stations. And then we do have a fair policy that we work through with Lynx and Votran on transfers back and forth between all 3 of the systems. So we operate our commuter rail between Monday to Friday, which is our base service. We run every 30 minutes during peak service and every 2 to 2.5 hours during off-peak service. Some of the pictures of some of the stations. I know you've all seen your downtown stations, but some of the other stations, Winter Park and Longwood, some of them chose to look a little different, and some of them look similar. Here are ridership trends between 2014 and 2015. So you can see the 2014 is blue, and then the 2015 is orange. So you can see there's been a pretty steady climb between the 2014 and 2015. And I should note that we've also been fighting gas prices too, right? So when we started this project, gas was probably like $3.50. It's now down to, I think, $1.77 I saw. So with that, transit always takes a hit. I was talking to some of the folks at Votran and Lynx the other day, as well as Tri-Rail, asking them how their ridership is doing, and they did say that gas prices affects transit. So, so we're looking to see what our January numbers look like. Our on-time performance is really good. Anything above 90%, it's a great trend to have, and you can see we're all well above 90%. We're hovering between 96 and 97, 98%. So we're pretty proud of that. We're keeping steady at our bike trends around 200. Lots and lots of bikes on those trains. So I think that you'll see that, I think, all across the country. A lot of folks are using mass transit and then bring in their bikes, and it's becoming a big way to get to work. Also, our ADA trends are keeping, you can see it's gone up a little bit from 2014 to 2015. Some days are larger, some months are larger than others, but we're around between 15 and 20 every day. And Norian talked a lot about the expansion, so we talked a lot about our base contracts were the 61 miles with Phase 2 South and Phase 2 North, and we spoke about the construction starting on Phase 2 South and continuing to look for funding sources for Phase 2 North. That'll bring the total to 17 stations along the 61 miles. And the transit-oriented development, I have to say, is amazing, especially down south. The Tupperware station, or Osceola Parkway, he's already signed contracts, and we haven't even broke ground for 1,000 residential units just surrounding that station. So and then commercial, he says, is coming right after. So that's a really interesting story for SunRail, and you build these stations and the transit-oriented development starts infilling around there.
The really cool thing about the Tupperware situation is they totally reoriented their campus to face SunRail.
Yes, yes. Before, I remember going in to see Mr. Rolk and showing him what could happen, and he said, it was kind of funny, he goes, I just make plastic bowls with lids on it. I'm not a developer. But he took that, and now he did what the mayor said. He hired folks to do a site plan. He's gone through the rezoning. He's got developers chomping, waiting to get in line to develop a piece of his property. So it's a really good success for SunRail and what the communities have done to embrace it. And then the last project that we haven't really talked about because it was outside the 61 miles, but it was placed as a priority on Metro Plan, is actually what we're calling Phase 3 to the airport. And we're in the process right now of doing the environmental documentation and doing preliminary concepts and operating plans for that particular project. And so we're looking to see how that could come off the main line and serve that new intermodal terminal that they're building out at the airport. So you'll get more information throughout this year as we move forward with that project.
A couple things about Phase 3. The nice thing about that route is either the City of Orlando through OUC or GOA owns all of the property that's depicted as the Phase 3 route, I think. Is there any on where you're exiting the track, the A line, right there?
There may
be just a little bit right there, but the vast majority of it, 99% of it, is owned either by the City of Orlando. Well, I guess we would own the GOA. It's all owned by the City of Orlando, as it turns out.
Where does it come in?
It's where the coal line it currently is. There's the coal line that goes to OUC.
I mean, but where on the map?
Oh, there's another map.
I know, but where on the extension does it come in?
Between Meadowwoods and Sand Lake, right?
Yes, yes. It's just, the Orange Avenue where the bridge goes over the railroad tracks right at Orange Avenue? It's right there. That bridge is over the tracks that go to the Stanton Power Plant.
And then just one other thing about that is the agreements that we have that currently exist do not contemplate Phase 3.
Right.
So there is a lot of negotiation yet to be done among the local funding partners relative to operation and construction of that line.
Right. Which has not begun yet.
Which has not been done yet.
So, what do you think?
Very good. And just one other thing for good information to have, since it'll probably be discussed in the next few weeks and months, is the maglev project has been given at least authority to move forward with study from the airport. So that is under discussion, and if they do move forward with that, it will be light rail and not maglev. Mm-hmm. And there would be a stop at the Sand Lake Road, potentially a stop at the Sand Lake Road SunRail station. The conundrum is their price point would be significantly different than what a publicly operated transit system would be. So there'd be probably some discussion about, do we need to take SunRail to the airport if maglev has a stop there?
Right.
But if you're paying $20 versus $2,
Right.
so there's still a lot of thought that needs to go into all of that as well.
Hey, Mayor, I had a question about that. Would that be in the same right-of-way or different right-of-way?
Different right-of-way. The, what is it, EFFI, I think is what, is that the acronym for them? EFFI? EMMI, which I forget what that stands for, environmentally, metro something. Anyways, maglev light rail would go north out of the airport property and then along Sand Lake Road, and would have potentially a stop at Sand Lake Road, a stop at the Florida Mall, and then land somewhere out near International Drive. So it would be a different corridor than SunRail would be on. Commissioner Stewart?
Thank you, Mayor. Let me kind of cover a couple of quick questions. And first of all, thank you all for everything that you've done. You've just been, every time we turn around and get a question answered, thank you for what you've done and for your commitment. A couple of quick questions. On the FCEN Railroad Agreement, I was a little bit confused. Do we have an agreement with them up through Eustis, or is that the use of their agreement to use the Amtrak tracks to get to the FCEN? Or the Florida coast?
We have an agreement, the DOT has an agreement with them for the use of the 61-mile corridor between
Okay.
Robinson, and they operate along the Stanton Spur as well. So
They have an agreement with us, but
Yes.
we don't have any additional agreement outside of, on their corridor
Right.
going to Eustis, which is
No.
one of the issues that we talked about.
Right.
In terms of a long-term potential there.
Yeah, they, CSX, it's my understanding, is CSX owns the underlying real estate, and FCEN owns the improvements on that real estate.
Okay. And any status update on that northwest corridor? I think it's kind of dead for right now, isn't it?
Well, the status update was, yes, the densities didn't show that it would meet the needs to get the federal funding. However, should folks want to, they could continue discussions as far as talking to perhaps FCEN and CSX as far as what would be the agreement between those two to get their feet wet if those costs would be. I mean, that's the one thing that could move forward in discussions per se, but that's, until densities increase, that's the one critical path item that could be worked on as far as discussions go.
On the interlocal agreements, I guess, maybe I'm back, sorry, let me go back to the maintenance. FDOT controls now the signals, controls the track in terms of signalization. I've forgotten what term you used to accomplish that task. But that's being transferred over to the Central Florida Rail Commission following the 7 years, or is FDOT still going to maintain that control of the track so that we have control of the freight?
No, the Commuter Rail Commission would then
Takes over
run
the entire,
the
takes over the
61-mile
entire
corridor,
operation.
yes.
So scheduling and all other trains coming through there
Yes.
are at the discretion of the Central Florida Rail Commission.
All of the, do you all have a copy of this yet, or?
Yes, we got one,
Okay,
yeah.
and sorry about
Yeah.
that. Yes, each contract that we went over would be transferred to the commission.
Yeah. But I mean,
The term you're looking for is dispatch.
yes, that's what I am, dispatch, I guess that's the term.
Yes, because the commission is now the owner of, yes.
Okay. And then probably the one thing not mentioned on here is any expansion from the rail line to Disney. There was a lot of discussion early on, a lot of discussion here. Is there anything beyond that has got any kind of traction?
No, not that I've heard of.
Okay, okay. And then my last question is that the hardest part for people that I talk to in the community is to understand that this is not a subway, this is commuter rail.
Right.
And so they want 15-minute increments in the coming to downtown, they want a bunch of other stuff that happens and that. So how do you all help address that, I guess, with the exception? Because having more stops more frequently during that midday and really does help us out in terms of bringing that ridership in from north and south. But at the same time, it's not, in a sense, it's not designed to jump on the train and go to Winter Park. We can do that, but that's really not what it's designed for. It's designed for the guy who lives in Winter Park to get to Point Siena. You know what I mean?
Yes, it's designed for commuter rail, but it does act in your area more like a light rail system.
Right.
But as you can see, the costs are heavy too. So until we've got to continue building transit-oriented development and build the ridership and continue to working with our businesses in that last mile of getting people to and from the station, that will build the ridership too. And then eventually you'll need, the stations are designed so you could go down to 15-minute service.
Yeah. Have you looked at, are you studying, I guess that's the question would be, do we have survey information about what the cost would be and the estimated riderships if you drop to 15, or we want to get through a couple of years before we really kind of make that decision?
I don't think we have the cost for 15-minute.
No.
Just what we think it'll be in year 7.
We will have those costs because those will be part of the discussion for Phase 3 to the airport, because as you go to the airport, you need weekend service, you need more off-peak service. I think the peak service, the 30 minutes, we haven't heard too much grumbling that's not enough service. Tri-Rail's been in operation for 7 years, and they're down to maybe 20-minute service. But what we hear the most is we want more off-peak service, we want more weekend service.
Right.
So as we talk about Phase 3 and serving the airport, we will have those costs to show the locals of what.
And remember, Commissioner, we've never done this before in Central Florida, so we're still on a learning curve. And in fact, did we just make the adjustment of stopping the very late night train and shifting that to the middle of the day?
Right, because we didn't have to hire more staff for Bombardier, we just squeezed in, and so we called it a pilot and got those numbers, and now we switched it to the 1 o'clock in the afternoon to see if we can get more riders at the 1 o'clock, and so we're calling that last day train a pilot to see if we can get more riders.
And not to get too down in the weeds, but there are federal requirements on how long people that operate trains can work, so you got to try to schedule all this stuff around so you don't end up with 3 shifts instead of 2 shifts and all that type of stuff.
Well, I think, and generally speaking, I think we said, look, let's have some time before, let's look at the riderships and what's going on. I guess probably what I would be concerned about is that when you begin to look at year 7, who's doing the survey work to determine that viability? Is it going to be the Central Florida Rail Commission, or are they going to come back to the city and share that cost, or is that just kind of a continued evaluation that FDOT is doing in this process?
What do you mean by the survey work?
I mean, the idea of looking at a ridership, I mean, what we don't want to end up doing, I would not want us to end up doing, is that sometime in year 6 going, hey, look, guys, you're going to take it over, but by the way, if you really want to have impact, you're going to have to go to 15-minute increments. And all of a sudden, you begin to start having a kind of an unknown number ahead of us, but
Yeah, well, we've got Harry Barley here, we've got Metro Plan and Volusia TPO that would assist, as well as DOT, to help, come up with studies to see what would be the biggest bang for your buck.
And I can tell you all the transportation agencies are keenly aware that we need to be looking at what's going to happen 5.5 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last question I asked was probably, I apologize for taking up time, is have we seen some impact, I guess we've just only got recent numbers, but the impact of the changes on I-4? And I know that the 2 issues that we thought were going to be consistency of gas prices at about $3 a gallon, they've now dropped.
Right.
And then all of a sudden you've got now some serious construction on I-4. Are we seeing some changes and increase in to that?
Well, I just met with the I-4 team just last week, and were a little bit behind. They didn't hire as many designers as they thought they needed, so they're a couple months behind. So they're about to hit hard construction. You've seen some, they've done very well with lane shifts and keeping things nice and clean, and I've been very impressed with that. But I think you'll see very soon the traffic hits, and then the gas prices are very low, so it'll be up to the frustration of the I-4 driver. Are they going to switch over to the train? Yeah. So we hope you'll see some sort of a shift, and but construction is going to start to get heavy, and it's not just one section of I-4. They have it split out into 4 sections, just like we designed it in 4 sections. They're going to be constructing in 4 sections.
Yeah. All right, thank you very much. Great job. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Hill?
Thank you, sir. Thanks for coming in. And
Thank you.
As you stated, this happened long before me. So almost like drinking out of a hydrant right now, but thanks for bringing me up to speed. I only had one question, and it was related to, of course, the mayor just spoke about it, about the ending of the nighttime service. I was wondering, has there been discussion on possibly a new projected date related to the new Orlando City Soccer Stadium and all the sports fans that's going to be infiltrating downtown in 2017 or so, and also related to eventually the Orlando Magic Sportsplex. And I know calls is something, but...
Well, for certain events, special events, we've worked with the City of Orlando and other funding partners to, they've sponsored events. So they've worked with us to do special trains. And they're not your normal day trains where you have to run the normal schedule. It's just for pick them up here and drop them off in certain schedules. And they've been quite successful. But that's like added on top of the budget. And of course, I'm trying to keep within, my budget is your budget. And so where we're at right now is if we add even one more train, we have to hire a whole new crew, which is really like an 8-hour day. And so so now we're just trying to tweak to see what is the best timings for everybody to get the most ridership. And we're doing that together.
Thank you.
Commissioner Ings?
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning.
Good morning.
Secretary Downs, Tawny. You guys have obviously been doing a super job with this whole project. Thank you so very much for your service for that. And obviously, with this presentation, it's so in-depth and very comprehensive. So again, my hat's off to you for such a great job. Well done. I'm surprised you guys didn't call up Harry to say something, from Metro Plan. But it's good seeing Harry Barley here as well. But
I'm sure we'll take a question if you have one for him.
One of the concerns that I was looking at was the ownership and control. Specifically, who controls the dispatch? Once that goes over into the hands of the local commission, so they would control all of the trains within that corridor?
Yes, they would dispatch the guests, which would be the payers, which would be Amtrak and CSX.
Okay, so
And Auto Train.
with that
which is
control,
Amtrak.
who controls the revenue? The commission as well?
Yes.
And how much of this revenue would be generated as a result of this control? And would that kind of help with the day-to-day cost and running the commuter rail system?
Yes, the revenue, definitely for CSX and Amtrak, as well as potential fiber in the system, that would have to be written into legislation, which could be $1 million a year revenue perhaps. And the more that we do advertising and things like that is all revenues coming in, which would be about 20 to 25% of the overall costs.
So it's a little confusing, Commissioner, when they refer to fare box, it's all the revenue generated, not just being paid to ride the train. It's the advertising, it's the use by other forms of rail, and it ends up being 20 to 25% generally is a national standard.
Thank you, Mayor, because that was the next question that I was going to ask about that fare box. Because as we really get into generating the revenue, the locals are getting ready to take this thing over, and obviously we're taking on a lot. And this is something that we obviously have designed to do. Thank you, Mayor, also for your leadership on being the chair of the commission right now and from the very beginning. So it's really been good for us. And I know the transition may be seamless, but we're going to need a lot of help, I'm sure.
Well, we'll be here to help.
All right. And that's all I had, Mayor. Thank you.
One of the options is to contract with DOT simply to continue the operation after 7 years.
I don't think that's in the agreement.
Commissioner Gray.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you so much for coming in. I think you said a second ago that you're staying within the existing operating budget Thank you for that. I'm curious about the ridership numbers. How do those match up with what we projected?
Projections were after the first year 4,300, and our first year was about 3,800. Now, recently with gas prices going down so low, we're less than 3,800, we're about 3,600, so that has affected us. I would assume once I-4 starts ramping up and gets pretty heavy under construction, you'll see more ridership. And of course, none of us can tell the economy and the gas prices. I don't get that. That's why I didn't like economics in school. So, but I would assume that you'll get riders from I-4 once construction takes place, and/or if gas prices go up, I assume you would get more ridership, as well as transit-oriented development being developed. I mean, that is another, that's the whole point of it. So that next gen, a lot of the teenagers, as you know, aren't getting driver's licenses now. They want to live, work, and play and have a little more free time. So it should all pick up once a lot of transit-oriented development is developed as well. And again, there's still many things we need to work on, getting all the businesses around our stations, just capturing those riders and letting them try SunRail to see if it works for them. It doesn't work for everybody. Some people have to drive too far to get on the train, so it doesn't work for everybody, but we are trying to have our marketing team try to capture more riders that it would be good for them to take the train versus, drive themselves to work.
Okay, well, thank you for saying that. Again, I don't know your business like you do, but it seems to me as somebody that works downtown, we haven't done probably as good a job as any of us would like to in creating the value play for SunRail. Certainly gas prices affect it, but I hope we're not basing, the strategy of SunRail on gas prices. Certainly I-4 is an issue, but I think, for my 2 cents, marketing efforts to create more of a value proposition for users, because I think everybody is aware that we have SunRail now. Now the connection is, why should I ride SunRail? Why is it a good value for me? And I know you're doing that, so thank you.
Agreed.
And
Carson, why don't you come up and just address some of the additional efforts that are being made? Because I've actually taken a little personal time and met with Florida Hospital and Orlando Health, and then we had a big group of downtown large company CEOs come in to try to encourage them to get their employees to use it. And what we found is there are some commissioner people that are just a little leery of, if they haven't tried it once, they're leery of how does it work, what do I have to do, and they just don't use it because they haven't ever tried it.
Agree?
Sure. Yeah, let me give you the quick overview of business development efforts. And that's kind of the title that we're using, business development, even though it's not traditional business development. We're not really trying to sell anybody.
Explain your role in this.
Sure. I serve as a business development consultant for SunRail, really working with our primarily downtown businesses, to educate them about the benefits of SunRail and to really, for lack of a better term, get butts in seats. Work with our businesses so that they understand the benefits, so that their employees understand the benefits, and really to encourage ridership in the downtown core primarily. Over the last 6 months, I'd say, we've learned a lot, but the 2 biggest pieces have been, number one, if we didn't know this inherently, we certainly do now. It is a big decision for people to leave their cars, particularly in a car culture that we live in Orlando and in Florida. It's a big deal to get people to get out of their cars. And so there's been a lot of hand-holding that goes on in a lot of businesses. It's not enough just to go and say, hey, SunRail's awesome. You can save this much money on gas. You can have a predictable time to be at your desk. You can avoid traffic. All those benefits, you've got to go into individual businesses and work with employees so that they understand, here's everything you need from A, B, C, D to E to get on the train and to really value. The second piece has been that it's a lot of homework for businesses. If you're a company that has an office or a headquarters in New York or DC, then you've got the HR practices in place to take advantage of the various tax benefits or other things that are associated with using mass transit. If you're a company that's headquartered here in Orlando, Florida, mass transit has very rarely been something that you're going to be able to take advantage of or on the HR and the actual kind of process side of it. So working with both of those. I think the first few months, of business development really focused on just mapping out what's our potential universe of riders. Obviously, as Noreen and Tawny said, everybody can't ride SunRail as it is. There's a lot of people that lived east and west. It's too far from the station. So mapping out what that universe of potential riders is, and now the focus is getting people to try the train once. I think that we've all kind of figured out universally that. SunRail is like a really cool car, but as great a car as it is, you got people to get a test drive of that car. And so we're now in a phase where we're doing, everything that we are doing on a business development front is about immediacy. If somebody wants to try that train out, we're going to do everything possible to get them on that train to have that experience. Mayor Dyer, as Mayor Dyer said, we had a meeting in December with about 35 of our largest and what you'd call probably most influential businesses to get them in and kind of make the personal appeal. Hey, if you haven't done so before, we want to get you in, and we want to be able to talk to you about the benefits so that you can in turn talk to your employees about those benefits and why this is a big deal. We've talked about gas prices, we've talked about construction and time delays, but the biggest piece, I think the one that probably right now is the biggest kind of buzzword is parking. Parking in downtown Orlando right now, and this is kind of anecdotal, but everybody we've talked to is really, the price of parking in downtown is going up, and there's even a lack of spaces in a lot of buildings. And so there's employers out there who are really looking at dollars and cents now and going, gosh, I could pay $175 per space per month, or I could offer a subsidy where I give my employee $50 or $100 a month to pay for their SunRail or other mass transit, and I can pocket that $75, so it's a pretty good deal. As I said, the focus right now is really immediacy. Last week we had a Try the Train Day where we worked with about 40 businesses. The primary group that we worked with was the ones that were invited to the meeting with Mayor Dyer, but we distributed about 900 tickets, and so the way we did it was you needed a ticket to go each way, so about 400 to 500 people received tickets to try the train, and so we had several hundred people that were trying the train out for the first time. This week we're doing it with Florida Hospital, just specifically because they're a single-site employer with a campus the size that it is. So we're going to do it with Florida Hospital this week, and the plan is to do these once a month. So if you're a business, again, immediacy, that has an employee, 3 employees, 4 employees, 20 employees, we want to be able to give you the opportunity to get on that train and have that experience.
Okay, thank you, Carson. Commissioner Sheehan?
And just to that as well, when I was younger, much younger, I bought a house in Deltona and I worked downtown, and I went through the construction of I-4 in the 90s, and I got to tell you, there were some days it would take me up to 5 hours to get to work. That was one backup. I just basically got to Lake Mary and turned around.
Yeah.
So I think that's what you're going to see is once it's going to be so inconvenient during the construction, and you're not going to be able to get to work. I don't care how cheap gas is. If it's going to start taking you 2, 3, 4, 5 hours to get to work, people are going to be looking for alternatives. I think that what we need to look at, though, what I'm hearing from people who want to use it now is the reliability of the bus connections to get them. I think when you get into downtown, you're fine because you can ride limo and we have all these other options. So the downtown commuters are going to be fine. It's making sure that those connections to get outside of that is going to be really critical as people start really relying on it as construction gets bad. And I've even noticed, I usually hop on I-4 just to get up to City Hall. I don't take that anymore because construction has started to ramp up and it's no longer convenient for me, so I take an alternate route. I can do that because I live in downtown, but these commuters can't do that. So again, as it gets less convenient, I don't care how cheap gas is, if you can't get to work, people are going to be riding SunRail, and that's why we wanted to do this. That's why the state took that on. But
Right.
It's going to get bad.
Yeah.
I mean, like I say, I just went through interchange construction, and the backups were for hours. It was a 30-mile commute for me. It literally would take me an hour and a half each way, and that was on a good day. And there were no alternatives. So I think that people will definitely, be looking at those. Just
Yeah.
my own anecdotal experience from having gone through, construction, and I solved my transportation problem. I gave up when I moved downtown. But not everybody has that option. So, and at the end of the day, I'm glad I made that decision for myself. But again, we've got 70,000 people coming again, more, just 70,000 in our downtown core. we got to figure out how to get the rest of those people around.
Right, and with Florida being a growth state, as you know, we've modeled what it's going to look like by, and I know 2050 is out there for most of us, but you're going to need I-4 reconstructed, the Beltway, and SunRail to move people in and out of the city. So it's a little slower than we wanted in the beginning, but it's moving. We got lots of balls to pick up every day, but we're troopers, as we call ourselves, and storm troopers, actually. And we know there's areas to work on. In fact, we had a train that was broken down this morning, a traction motor, and so we have a meeting this afternoon to see what the heck happened there.
So Commissioner
Commissioner Ings has one more over here.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mayor. FDOT actually maintains the ownership of the corridor after May 1st, 2021. So with that, what fee or fees would be charged to the local commission for the use of the corridor, if any? In other words, once FDOT maintains its control of the corridor and the commission has now ownership of that, but are they paying for that right to use that corridor with FDOT?
They have a lease. The commission has an easement over the whole piece of property
Okay.
to use.
Okay, so there's no fee then that's actually being charged to the commission for use of that?
No,
Okay,
no, not at all.
okay.
So, Mayor, there you have this backstory on how Commissioner Sheehan became the longest running person on the commission.
If it hadn't been for traffic, I probably wouldn't be here.
The I-4 construction moved over to downtown Orlando. How about that? Luann, Tawny, thank you very much. It occurs to me that probably, let's see, you have about 2 months' worth of doing these presentations, so maybe we'll have you back with Laureen to give us an update on the I-4 construction sometime after that.
Sounds good. We'll do it.
Okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
And that concludes our workshop for today, January 25th, 2016.